record here, and then good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this WIOA Performance Office Hours session. My name is Kirsten Bayer, and I am with the Illinois Center for Specialized Professional Support. It is a very long name, I know. The acronym is even longer, but we are used to all the long acronyms here within the workforce system, right, within WIOA. So I will be your technical support and just kind of liaison for today and facilitator. So if you need anything during this session, please feel free to reach out to me. Couple of housekeeping things. This is a Zoom meeting, so everybody has the ability to unmute themselves if they need to. When we prompt you to, the presenters will prompt you when we have times for questions and comments. During the presentation, if you would rather put anything in the chat, you should be able to do that. And then we will have the opportunity to communicate that way as well. This session is going to be recorded, and Mark is going to send that out as a follow-up with any other materials that you might need after today's session. And then we're going to put the materials, the presentation slide from today and everything in the chat here momentarily. If you could just give me a second when I'm done talking, I'll do that. But then I will start us off with our beginning polls. So first, we just want to know kind of where you're joining us from today across the state. So I started with that one. I'm sorry, Mark, but if you could just tell us where your local area is, then we can kind of see where everyone's joining us from today. All right. So it looks like that's slowing down. I'm going to end that poll and share the results. Looks like most of you are joining us from Central Illinois and Northern Illinois. So I'm joining you from Central Illinois too. Our office is in Bloomington, Normal. And I live in Decatur. So I'm working from home today. So I get to reside in Decatur. Okay, and then I'm gonna do the other poll here really quickly, which we would just like to know, what is your role within the WIOA system? So we'll give everyone about a minute roughly to answer this question. And I think I'm missing an option on this poll actually that I'm just noticing, so I apologize for that, but WIOA performance, if you fall underneath that category as well, if you could just put that in the chat. I apologize, I missed that option here on the poll. So if you want to put that in the chat, we would appreciate it. Give it a couple more seconds as a couple more people answer here. Looks like a lot of you are putting the WIOA performance in the chat though, so I'll assume that's that. That is those people. So thank you all for participating. Looks like most of you are Title I directors and system administrators. Some career planners are joining us as well as WIOA performance members. So thank you for joining us. And then I'll hand it off to you, Mark, and your team to start your presentation for today.
Great, thank you, Kirsten, and thank everyone for joining us today. This is going to have a feel of a webinar. I'm going to back up to the beginning here, but really this is what we call our quarterly office hours. We met for the first time under this format back in May, and we're going to keep doing these every 3 months. And we just decided, with a little input from some of our local planning assistant staff, to use this time for updating you on various things, including the negotiations. So what I'm going to do first is pull up our agenda for today as office hours, and you'll be able to see that. And if you can go ahead and put those there in the chat again, the agenda and the PowerPoint we'll go to here momentarily. We've got the same format, 3 main areas for this. We actually are cutting short a little bit today. Sorry, I've got 3 o'clock there. Hopefully we don't need to go beyond 2:30. I know we sent out a notice for 2:30. So hopefully we'll be able to stop by that time. we've got our what's new, and you'll see, and you've been getting hopefully the emails from Laura Dom on some new policies, revised policies, notices, some good updated guidance. Nothing too dramatic in any of those. Some of these were already held within other documents, so there's not much change. Some of these I'll be talking about when I get to the PowerPoint around the local negotiations. So that's the first one. There is, we are entering into a period where we'll be doing local negotiations for program years 22 and 23. And so we've implemented a new policy that kind of just speaks in general terms to the policy, to the process. And then there's a WIOA notice update from the last one received a couple of years ago. So this will be changed too, that outlines those specific items related to this round of negotiations, again, for program years 22 and 23. So again, nothing too dramatic there. In fact, when we get to that more overview for the performance negotiations, I do want to point out that we did a survey last time around after the negotiations, and overwhelmingly we received positive feedback. And then when we spoke to our planning team that involves some of the local representatives of performance, they indicated they really didn't see a need to make any wholesale or even much at all as far as changes. So the process is going to be very similar. If you were part of that last time around, nothing will be new to you for the most part. So we'll make sure we cover every one of those aspects. The next set of policies under item number 2 are around performance again, but we speak in general terms again to the statistical adjustment model. And for all of you, beginning 2 years ago, this has been a developing item. We've been working with NIU, Brian, Richard, and Andy Blunt for quite a while now, trying to develop a SAM for the PY20 outcomes. As you know, we provided you your assessments at the conclusion of that program year, quite a few months after, once we received ours at the state level. And we received your feedback, and we've been working in a number of arenas over the last several months to continue this work in progress. And please note that this is a continual work in progress. I don't know that we'll ever get to a perfect state, but we certainly want to continue to hear from you and learn from you and take your input into consideration as we work on the statistical adjustment model moving forward. So as we get nearer putting an assessment out for PY21, which will come again either late this year or early next year, as it did last time around, we want to refine that. And so the efforts we've been doing, we put together a couple of in-person roundtables in the northern part and downstate. Had quite a bit of feedback, some really good comments that we've taken into consideration. And also from that, we created a couple of work groups. One of those was focused primarily on the statistical adjustment model or the technical aspects of this policy. And they continue their work today. In fact, they're looking into different modeling, taking the input they received from their first couple of meetings and gathering more information. So Brian and Andy will be updating that work group where they're at. I think they're going to take a little bit of a break, especially during these this negotiation period, give you a little bit of time to work on these developments, and they'll get back to you on when you'll meet again. So you should be looking for something from Brian and Andy on upcoming meetings, maybe being rescheduled until late in September or even all the way into October. And then there was another work group that we called our process and planning work group that helped us really understand better performance as a kind of a holistic approach, and what that means to policies and what that means to guidance. And so again, they helped us realize that the negotiation process as written 2 years ago was pretty good. In fact, some of the comments we received, they thought it was, I'm just reading a few of these from the last time around. Someone indicated the process was appropriate, the call went well and was fair. They thought the conversation process and discussions were organized and effective. We had a board member indicate they were very impressed with the negotiation. They thought they were on an equal footing with us here at the state level in those negotiations, and that we were willing to listen to all of you in these calls and work with you on setting the expected levels of performance. I'm sorry, the negotiated levels of performance, or as we sometimes call performance goals. But we did receive a few challenging responses that we wanted to clarify in instances and update. So those led to some of the changes that you might see minimally in this process. Some felt that we didn't make it clear what the actual goal was. You know, if you're familiar with our process, we set a goal, and then your expectation for PY20 was to reach 90% of that to succeed, to successfully perform. And so we apologize if we weren't clear in that expectation, but we're going to show you today what the expectation is moving forward, starting in PY21. Some asked about comparisons of LWIAs. We'll get to a slide or two, and I'll speak specific to that, why we want you to look at what other LWIAs, how other LWIAs are performing, those that are similar to you in similar areas of the state. We do that at the state level, so we'll talk about that. Someone thought that the process was a little too rigid with only one person having the ability to talk, and again, we apologize if it wasn't clear. What we really ask for is one lead spokesperson to do the negotiation. Certainly you have the opportunity to speak amongst your team. And if you want someone who has maybe more expertise, more knowledge of the data and information supporting your case, we don't have a problem with them speaking up. It's just the primary basis of the call. We need to have one spokesperson who will act on behalf of the board, whether they be a board member or other team member, and who will make final agreement with us at the state level on what those negotiated levels will be. So hopefully, again, we address that clearly today. Let's see, and then a couple people thought that maybe the state negotiated too high, which in turn affects your negotiations. We certainly understand that. We'll show you what we negotiated for these next 2 years, kind of talk you through where we landed, and hopefully have a better understanding of how you at the local level play into that. And then the final one goes without saying, I think, is people always are going to have some concern until we get through this period of COVID. And you know, we're still in the midst of it, while the precautions out in the public have been maybe different in guidance. We still know it's out there, and it's affecting some of our ability to perform on a daily basis. Some of you can't get into your offices still. So we understand that's an issue, but the whole overall, you know, kind of landscape of these negotiations, of performance outcomes, of measures under WIOA, is that's what the statistical adjustment model will take into consideration. So back to that policy 3.5, you know, there will be those situations that are out of your expectations, or I'm sorry, not out of your planning, your anticipation, your ability to handle them. The SAM will take into account all of those. What it doesn't take into account is the things you can control. So you know, we do understand your concerns with how COVID affects all this, but please, you know, continue to bear with us as we develop materials and the SAM and all of that, and provide you more guidance that if this works, you know, as it's working properly, it will take into account the SAM, will take into account those COVID effects. So, you know, there were some challenges you all expressed, but again, hopefully we'll address those in today's presentation. Policy 3.6 is really a change from what you're expected. So I just mentioned you were unclear going into the 2021 negotiations what the expectation was, and at that time it was 90% of your adjusted goals. So remember that we set negotiated goals or expected levels, and then negotiated goals, I should say, and then those will be adjusted at the end of a program year. That's what you're actually assessed against. And at that time, for PY20, it was a 90% threshold. We do have new thresholds that I'll show on several slides today, going away from the 90% in an individual indicator only. You know, be mindful that this is going to change. And then we put out an area on performance sanctions appeals. The roundtables asked that there be policy on that. So in instances where you receive your assessment and you feel like there were some uncontrollable areas that maybe led to you underperforming, not performing successfully, you want to have the ability to appeal, and that seemed only right. We have appeals processes in many areas of policy, including the eligible training provider list and grievances and things of that nature. So we've incorporated an appeals process in this policy chapter. All of these are held within chapter 3. I'm just highlighting those 3.5 through 3.7 that are newly issued this week or last week from Laura, our policy manager. And it's a fairly simple appeals process. We will ask you to justify and substantiate why you're appealing the outcome, and we will sit down and work with you and see come to a resolution. And then the final item there under what's new is a new notice on what we call the SAM, or the pilot project. So again, going back to PY20, you were held harmless. And even though you might have get an indication in your assessment that you underperformed, didn't perform successfully, there were no sanctions. There were no consequences for that program year. And again, we listened to all of you, and we have asked and got approval to extend the hold harmless through PY21 as we continue this work in progress. So that notice will show that it shifts the entire table of when sanctions start kicking in, beginning with technical assistance, elevating after a second consecutive year to a performance improvement plan, or PIP. And then again, if there's a third consecutive year in the same measure for the same program, potential for additional sanctions. So that's the key there is it's the progression of consecutive years has to be the same assessment, not any assessment. So if you didn't perform in, let's say, adult second quarter earnings 1 year, and then next program year you underperformed in dislocated worker MSG, that's still a single year in each of those. You didn't underperform in 2 consecutive years in the same measure. So that notice will clarify that to you. And there's associated policy to that as well under the incentives and sanctions for performance section 3.7. So as Kirsten said, if you've got any questions, please post those in the chat. We'll answer those as we can. We certainly will open up the lines at points in time here. But I'll go ahead and move on to the bulk of our presentation today. And again, I know it feels like a webinar when I start this, but we felt it was just the best way to get you the information you need around these upcoming local performance negotiations. So I'm going to jump to the PowerPoint. In the back of your mind, the third area that we ask for in these quarterly office hours is maybe all of you can be thinking about something you want to share with the entire group, the entire state, on some good things you're doing that maybe helped you succeed in performance in PY20, and you think will help you and has set you on a good track to perform well moving forward as well. So if you got something you would like to share, please be prepared during this last period of the open discussion to open up your microphone and share that with us. And then we'll finalize with just some final comments there. So I'm going to jump over to the PowerPoint now. And we've already gone through these first few slides. Thank you, Kirsten. This is our team as you've met us all previously, many of you in person when we held the roundtables finally. It was really great to, if nothing else, great to see everybody again in person. But those were very valuable and resulted in a lot of great conversation and some changes. So we've got Patty unable to join us. She had a conflict today, but she's our manager over the performance technology area. Paula, you all know she's been here for quite a while doing all the performance. So we rely on her quite heavily for responses to all of your daily questions. And then I am Mark Burgess, the performance manager. Feels like I just started yesterday, but it was actually over 2 years ago now. So time's moving quick. Hopefully everyone else is keeping up with everything. these are two experts in the data analysis and development of the Statistical Adjustment Model, Brian Richard and Andy Blanc with Northern Illinois University. Andy's available today if there are any questions around some of the data that we're going to show you, and we'll provide you some links of where you'll be able to get that data. It's very similar to what we did last time, but just updated with more current information. We've gone through these, so let's go. So here's what we want to talk about as far as local performance negotiation. We want to go over again the negotiation factors and clarify some of what those each maybe hold for you. As occurred last time, we are asking that you submit expected levels of performance prior to scheduling a negotiation call. That's kind of the starting point on your end. If we agree with your expected level, we might accept that. And when we start the call, we'll let you know that those are ones we'll not have to discuss during the negotiation call. If you submit something that is in line with what we had anticipated, then it makes the call that much easier, and we can jump into the other ones that we need to discuss. We sometimes call these and did in a lot of the documents last time, they're proposed goals. So if you see proposed goal, it's the same as expected levels. We're just trying to get the language consistent across all of our documents as well as with DOL's documents. And then the third item there is the negotiation calls themselves. We'll be asking you again to submit a team of up to 5 individuals. We'd love to see some board members, board chairs, maybe even a CEO on some of these calls, but we do understand the difficulty in freeing their schedule for these. But certainly encourage them to be part of the process of developing the expected levels that you're going to submit on the local level if they can't join the call themselves and be part of the active discussions. We'll do the negotiations, then afterwards, at the conclusion of that call, we will make sure we are agreeing on the same levels for all of the 15 measures we'll be negotiating. And then at any point, again, place your comments or questions in the chat pod or raise your hand. And Paula, Kirsten, if you can kind of keep an eye on someone that might want to speak up instead of chat, put it in the chat, let me know and stop me, and we'll have them open up their phone line. So here's a simplified kind of process. I just mentioned most of that. We want you to plan, get your negotiation teams together, collect data and information, both what we're going to provide you, direct you to, as well as any other additional information you might have. And we'll show you some examples of that later. You'll submit those performance goals or expected levels using the same form we used last time. It's just revised to reflect the new 2 program year cycle, attachment G, and on that you'll submit the expected level and all of your team members, as well as the lead that we can expect to hold the majority of the conversation with, and then participate in the calls, actively be there and talk with your team members when you maybe have a difficult time in what we might propose as a counter to yours. So take the time to talk offline or however you want to set that up. It's a little bit more difficult still with us all working remote to have those kind of private discussions, but there's ways around that. If anyone has questions on that, we can certainly let you know how we're doing it at the state level, and maybe you can replicate the same process locally. But again, nothing's changed in this area. Here's your timeline. We've got one item that's still forthcoming. We should get out by the end of the week. Part of that will be finalized based on any input from today's discussions. But we're holding this today as our quarterly office hours. Mark your calendars. Next time around, again, it'll be 3 months from now. So November 16th, we'll be doing this again. We'll determine what the topic is prior to that and try to get out. I apologize. We'll get that link out for registration earlier than we did this time. This was my mistake in not understanding that. I thought it had already gone out as a series of requests, but we only did them one at a time. So we'll make sure the next time around you get that registration early in the process and get these on your calendar. So like I said, we'll show you a comparison tool that we used last time, but with updated information. That's today. So that'll be the introduction of that data to you. We'll move into the expected levels, we'll ask that you submit those by September 2nd. We know it's kind of a short amount of time to get all of your team together, review the data and all that. We do ask if you can all meet that September 2nd, but if not, just realize the sooner you submit your expected levels, the better off you're going to be in finding a date and a time that's available to meet with us at the state level. So the first one that comes in, as we did last time, they're going to get the first choice of all the available dates and times. And we're going to be conducting these throughout September, actually starting, if someone wants to hold theirs at the end of August, we'll make ourselves available starting on August 30th. So the sooner you can get those expected levels in, the better off you're going to be in scheduling. We do have a couple extra days, if you note, at the end of September, if we have to go into the 29th and 30th. We didn't put those on there because we wanted to use those as our opportunity to get all the letters out to all of you, confirming what the conversations were. And we have to submit those, as you see on this list. We have to submit those to DOL as well. So we wanted to leave ourselves a couple days. But if we have to use those, our only obligation is we complete all of our negotiations by the end of September. So we do have a couple days to play with if we get down to crunch time and someone is unable to maybe meet that September 2nd deadline of submitting expected levels, and then they're down to a very few number of days and time slots available. If we have to go into the 29th or 30th, we can, but we do have to be done with these by September 30th, as DOL has not given us extension as we received last time around. And then a final reminder, all of your negotiated goals will need to be put into your local plan, so you'll need to do a modification. We ask that be done within 2 to 3 weeks of you conducting your negotiation, getting your final numbers from us in a letter. So for the most part, all of those should be updated by October 20th. We'll go to the next one here. So what are we talking about? Just a quick recap. We're not going to go into the measures themselves, but we will be negotiating on 5 indicators of performance, or as we're commonly calling them, performance measures, in all 3 of the Title I programs: adult, dislocated worker, and youth. There is a 6th measure that continues to be in a pilot stage with DOL, so we aren't going to be negotiating. We're still awaiting them to review all the information we've been submitting as states for the last several years and identify what 1 measure or 2 measures. I don't know if they have any thoughts of going beyond just 1, but they'll be dictating to all states what the 1 measure for effectiveness in serving employers will be. And at that point, if it occurs in the next couple of years, I assume it'll be part of negotiations in 24 and 25. But we're negotiating on employment rates 2nd and 4th quarter, or if you're youth, and education and or training as well. Median earnings 2nd quarter, the credential attainment rate 4th quarter after exit, and then measurable skill gains. You'll note that the 1st and the 3rd one on that list, the 2nd quarter employment and the median earnings, were applicable in only those 2 in PYs 20 and 21. But moving forward, our assumption is all 5 of these will be on the table for assessment unless we're otherwise guided from DOL, as occurred last time when they dropped the measurable skill gains from the assessments. So again, nothing earth-shattering or new there. The process again, and getting these terms, kind of the reason of this slide is so we're all familiar with the terms again. You've got expected levels of performance. That's what you'll submit to us. We submitted those to DOL as a state in our unified state plan submission back in March. Once you've submitted those, we receive them, we prepare for negotiation calls. We'll determine negotiated levels of performance. And again, these are agreed upon in those calls. And then finally, at the end of each program year, we'll adjust the negotiated levels based on the information contained within the SAM and the model of that, just as we did for PY20 and we'll be doing for PY21 in the next several months. So again, those are the 3 kind of levels of performance everyone should be familiar with. You might be familiar with the first one again as a proposed level, but the technical term is expected level of performance. Okay, so let's start talking about that one. policy that came out about what will you be held accountable for, and this is the same. These are the same 3 items that the states are held accountable for. We met again with work group. We met in the regional roundtables. 2 things came of those around assessments. The first one was, and is that there's no specific outlined measure threshold that states have to hold local areas to. So we went into the last round of negotiations with a history of using 90% as the threshold, and we kept it at that. We took this as an opportunity to realize we don't have to stick with 90%. And so we looked at various ways to do assessments, and especially to recognize all the great things that all of you are doing. And we feel like this 3-pronged approach, which is again what the states are held accountable to, will better reflect that you're going to do some good things, a lot of great things. And even if you have 1 or 2 measures, indicators where you have a lower outcome, that shouldn't be considered as negative as it appeared in the 90% threshold. So we're looking at this in 3 prongs. We have the individual indicator score, which is similar to what we've done in the past. Each individual measure, each individual indicator will be assessed on its own merit in each of the 3 programs. We then look at 2 other measures that have been added, and these are overall program score, which is an average of the 5 individual indicators within each of those 3 programs. So I showed you, I'm going to go back real quick. I showed you these 5 measures. If I can go back, all right. So across the adult program, what is the average of the outcomes assessed for all 5 of these measures? That's your program, overall program score. And then the other one is if I'm looking at a measure across the board, so let's say employment rate 2nd quarter for all 3 programs, what is the average of those 3 outcomes is what this overall indicator score is. And to make that a little bit clearer and show you what the levels are in the new policy received, each of the single individual indicator scores needs to achieve at least a 70% score. And what 70% represents? That's not your outcome. That's not what you look in when you look in iWids, or if you're looking in Career Connect or iPads, and you see a number of, let's say, 82.3. That's not an indicator score. That's your actual outcome that gets compared to the adjusted level of performance. That resulting formula output is your indicator score. So for ease of numbers, if you were to have 63% and your adjusted level was 70, you would have achieved 90% as an indicator score, right? 63% of 70 is 90. So you would have performed successfully in that indicator. So this gives you a lot of leeway from what we used to do at 90%, to focus on things that are innovative, focus on new policies that you don't know until you try them how successful they're going to be. So hopefully you recognize the significance of that number as far as performing successfully. And then the other 2, and I'll show you two or three tables here in a moment to really visualize this in numbers, are both set at 90% as averages. When you look back at your assessment, you're going to find out that you might have had an 83% in one of your scores, but everything else was much higher. And the 90%, when you average them together, probably was not a problem achieving. Don't feel like that 90% is as difficult as you might suspect it is. If you're reaching all of these 70%, in most instances, you're going to reach these 90% because most of you aren't even going to come close to 70%. Most of you are in the 90% range, 100% range, 100+% as an indicator score. And so even if you had a 75 or 80 on one of those measures, one of those outcomes, your average across the board would be much higher than 90%. So here's the first example. This is an LWIB that would have performed successfully across all three of those assessment values. I'm going to zoom in here and show you. So the first one are the 5 measures, and you see nothing is under 70%. So nothing is highlighted as not successful. Even though you see this 72%, that now meets the 70% threshold in that single indicator. So while it looks like an outlier, that's perfectly acceptable from an assessment standpoint. Even these 83.7, 89s that previously would not have looked as good to a 90% threshold are all acceptable. And that again could be for various reasons, whether you've tried something different. This one would be the employment rate fourth quarter after exit in the adult program. Maybe you were trying something unique, different, new. And so you were just kind of trying to realize what the outcome would be. And I'm continuing. Okay, Amy, can you explain that again? Maybe do an example. Is this what you're asking for an example, Amy? Showing you these numbers?
Yes, but okay. What on the screen? What is the there? Thank you.
I just wanted to show you the numbers to show that all these numbers, these 15 numbers here, are the individual indicator scores. The ones in the center here. Okay. So you see the 5 measures here, you see the 3 programs here. So let's move to the second and the third one. One is overall program score. So I'm looking down the column of a Title I program, and I'm averaging all 5 numbers together. That gives me an overall program score. In this instance, even though you were at 72%, which was acceptable for a single indicator, it didn't bring this LWIB down below 90% in an overall program score. And you can do that for all 3 programs here and see that this LWIB would have successfully performed under the overall program score.
So it's average of averages.
Yes. It's not reformulating. So let's say the adult program, this first measure, employment second quarter, had 100 individuals in the denominator. The next one had 200. The next one had 120. Those are irrelevant. We're just adding these 5 percentages together and dividing by 5 to get to this number at the bottom. And that's exactly how DOL is doing it with states.
And the indicator is by each measure.
So then you're going across
right side. Okay, got it.
So you're only going to have 3 numbers averaged to get to these numbers over here. And in this instance, even 72%, again, it's passing. It's successful performance in this indicator doesn't bring you below. As low as that might feel to you, nobody got that low except for one instance I'll mention here in a moment. In fact, nobody was below 81 point something percent in any of the individual indicator scores that were assessed in PY20. So this is a huge outlier. If someone were to, an LWIB was to perform at 72% as an indicator score, I think it's a real outlier. And we would want to look into that and figure out, make sure the numbers are correct. And everything before we, ensure that that's the calculation that's accurate. And so even it kept you at 90%, even though this one was very low. And the one thing I didn't show here.
One more time, those indicator scores are that 72%. That's not your fourth quarter rate. What is that 72%?
Right.
Go back to that.
Right. So if you negotiated to 80% and your outcome was 72%, someone do that math real quick. I think it's 90%.
Okay.
Your indicator score would be 90%, not 72, which was your actual outcome.
Right. Okay.
Okay. Probably should have had a slide. I probably should have had a slide showing that. I'm sorry. I apologize. But hopefully you get what these are all calculations coming up with an indicator score. It's not your actual. It's your actual on top and divided by your adjusted level.
All right.
So again, yeah, great. Thank you. And to the other question, Dina, we will eventually, I don't know that we'll get an IWIDS. I don't know if IWIDS is even, I don't even know the word, if it has capability of putting all of this in there. But we are going to put IPATs to test and try and get all of this into IPATs eventually. It's going to be a lot of work to get all this in there. And the one thing you'll have to make note is we don't know the adjusted outcomes until after the program year and quite a few months after. So we're never going to be able to really show you a true indicator score, a true overall indicator score, true overall program score until the completion of the year when we can apply a SAM. So we want to work, and we've already talked to the planning work group. One of the things we need to come up with is best practices for all of you to understand. If I have an actual outcome midway through a program year and all I have is a negotiated rate, how do I know where I'm really at? And so we need to look at some history of data. We need to look at some ways of how these things evolve, and come up with some processes and some ways of depicting whether you truly feel like you're succeeding or not in meeting your what would be adjusted goals that we don't know. I mean, we get that it's a real odd situation, but it is what we're provided. We're doing the best we can at the state to oversee what we've got to do and pass on what we can to all of you. So those of you that are on that work group, once we get done with the negotiations, we're going to really jump into that, try to maybe have something ready for PY21 outcomes. Obviously, we'll be able to use what we have in the past few years to start kind of playing with numbers as far as predicting and saying, oh, okay, now I know where we got to. It's all work in progress. We've mentioned that. Patty just wants to stress we want to continue to listen to you and evolve and do better with this, and do the best we can, whether we ever get to perfect or not. The last point I want to make on these numbers before I jump to the next one, you'll note here, none of these are above 100%. Yet, if I recall our assessments in just 2 measures over 3 programs for 22 LWIAs, there were easily, so that's 132 measures, I think it is, or 122. There were easily 60, 70 that were well above 100%. So this is really under predicting potential for most of you, because you're probably going to have one of these indicator scores is going to be, one or more of these indicator scores are going to be over 100%. So, 72 is probably not going to be a problem when you have hundreds over here anyway. What you don't want to have is any of these under 70, again, as the new guidance states. So let's move to, I'm going to change one number now and show you what happens with this modeling. Yeah, the methodology, we can't give you an assessment until we apply a SAM, until we have actual outcomes, actual characteristics of the participants, actual economic conditions, like we did last time. We don't know what your adjusted score is, so we can't really tell you. We can show you maybe like in a negotiated indicator score. We could probably put that. In fact, on iWiz, it shows it at 90% right now. You would be able to see what your indicator score. We don't call it an indicator score because that was new terminology introduced in the last couple of years. We could update it or put it in iPads to say this is your indicator score against your negotiated. But until we have adjustments utilizing the SAM, we don't know what the adjusted levels of indicators are. And so we can't do final and give you any of that information until quite a ways after the completion of the program year. So is that clear, Renee? Great, thanks. So if we just change one score, and I'm focusing on that 72 again, let's drop that. Let's say you really try to do something unique, something exploratory, something creative, and it didn't work out to what you thought it might have, at least as far as your actual outcomes. And be mindful, if you didn't perform in this measure once, and then you realized what you needed to do, and you did well the next year, then the sanctions within that policy and guidance are very minimal. It's technical assistance. We'd probably want to sit down with you anyway and say, okay, let's see what happened. Is there something you could tweak that others can learn from? Maybe someone else can give you some advice that when you did your modeling or did your process or your new policy didn't take into consideration, and just this one change might increase these outcomes. So, the technical assistance is really continuing to learn of how you can better perform, exceeding your expectations, our expectations. But we know, at times there's just going to be opportunities where a number might fall down in this way to a lower number. Now, so if that one indicator dropped to 63.2, it would have resulted in 3 unsuccessful performance outcomes. Hopefully that's clear. If you're looking at this the same way, no other number changed, but when we change the average of these 5 in the center, it dropped us below 90% in our program score. But again, remembering that I don't think we're going to see too many LWIAs, if any, not have some hundreds somewhere along the line here that will probably maybe only result in the underperformance being in the indicator itself. And this would be above 90%. If you took this 89.1 at the bottom and you had 110, well, you would be well above 90% when you average these together. So,
and just
yep.
to quick, it would be over 100 percent if you exceeded the measure.
Yes,
Right.
your adjusted
Okay.
level. So if you negotiated, let's say, to 72%, your actual outcome was 74%, and your adjusted level of performance was 73%. So even though it ticked up 1% from your negotiation, your outcome was still above your adjusted level, which is well above 100% of meeting that adjusted level. Or it could have resulted in that 72 negotiation going down to 69. Who knows? Again, these can go both ways, although the majority of adjustments did take your negotiations across the board for all 22 LWIAs. The majority of them took them down. And I'll show you a little bit of that here near the end of how PY20 played out. So I'm trying to help you understand that we're going into these negotiations. We want to work with you, and we don't want you to be too overwhelmed with some of these numbers and think that, obviously the 63.2 would be an issue as far as successful performance or not. But again, if it only happens the 1 year and next year you correct it, you're above 70, you start back at scratch in that measure. And if you can overcome that with these other 14 items or indicators and get these bottom line and right hand column above 90%, then you're not going to have any issues with those as far as successfully performing. But again, just because of the numbers that we're working with across and down, one measure, one outcome that dropped almost 9% as an indicator resulted in 2 other underperforming outcomes. It could. Hopefully that doesn't happen. Hopefully, if you have one indicator, it's not going to cost you these other 2 when we average them together. But I just wanted to pick how it could. And then the next one I'm going to show, if you'd only marginally made this indicator, so you hit 70% on the nose, you'll note we're successful down here now because the average of the 5 is above 90%. But because of it 70% averaging with only 2 other measures in the program or the indicator across, it would have resulted in the unsuccessful performance outcome on this indicator score for employment rate 4th quarter. So even if you had a little bit less in this one indicator from where we started at 72 point something, and you still met 70, it could still affect over here. But again, if you were able to exceed in these 2 title, the youth and the dislocated worker measures at a higher level, you'd probably be over 90% over here too. So even reaching 70% may not have resulted in underperformance over here. So those 3 examples helping you understand how this is going to work when we go to do assessments moving forward. Anyone have any questions on that? I see Dina does have a statement saying it'd be great if we can show the negotiated goals as kind of as benchmarks. And I think we'll look into that on iPads. Like I said, I don't think we'll be able to. We might be able to easily change IWIDs to go from 90% to 70% and have at least the indicator score on IWIDs. I don't think we'll get to the program score and overall indicator score anytime soon, if at all, just because of the difficulty of updates to IWIDs, staffing, things of that nature. But iPads, I think we can work with Illinois WorkNet and create a page or incorporate with what's already there, because you can see a lot of these outcomes. We can probably put that in, hopefully maybe before we get the PY21 assessments out, or at least soon thereafter, so you can start seeing your PY22s as they evolve.
Okay.
I-
Mark,
Go
this
ahead,
is
Tony.
Tony. I've got a
Yeah,
quick
Tony.
question for you. So these scores are just being divided by 3. There's no weighted average, right? It
Correct.
doesn't matter if you serve 3 times as many adults as you do the other 2 combined or whatever. It's just divided by 3, right?
That is absolutely correct. And we asked DOL about that, and that's the methodology they're using. So we're going to stick with that.
Mark, I have
Yeah.
a question on that. This is Carrie.
Uh-huh.
On that credential attainment rate, second quarter after exit, is there a reason why it's second quarter and not fourth quarter?
My error.
Okay, perfect.
So I'll correct that on these slides. And thank you for that. I got it in the list above. When you start typing these things up, everything looks the same. So that's my error.
Okay, perfect. I was just hoping that something didn't change and I didn't know it. So thanks.
Oh shoot, what are we doing here? Gotta get back here. Did someone else have a question? I'm gonna go ahead and change this while I'm on here. While I'm listening.
Yeah, I did. It's Amy again. So is this the overall program score and the indicator scores is that part of the negotiation process, or this is just how we're going to be reviewed going forward?
Yeah, I think certainly you want to take into consideration what your thresholds are when you negotiate, and know that you've got some leeway in any one individual indicator, but know that you don't want to go, you want to be mindful that all these averages come into play when we go to do the assessment. So
the overall, what you're looking for, the state is looking for then is an overall program score above 90 and no indicator scores below overall indicator score below 90,
right,
and no individual indicator score below 70.
Correct. So if you think about it, in reality, if I was looking at this, I would first say, how can I get to everything being right at 90% in my negotiated number? Because then I know I'm going to reach 90% down here at the bottom or over to the right. But that's not realistic to know, and we don't know how things are going to play out. So you're going to take into consideration and say, well, I know I do well in the adult second quarter every year and maybe measurable skill gains every year. So I can maybe negotiate a little bit up on those because I know I can achieve those at 70% certainly, and maybe at 90 and even 100 plus. But maybe you have difficulty in this employment rate fourth quarter, and you're historically, if you look at it as an indicator score, you're around 85, 90, 92%. So you're going to be a little bit more cognizant of that when you go into them. And we're going to look at these numbers. We don't want to surprise you with too strong a numbers. We want everyone to succeed, but we also want everyone to continue to perform as well as you always have. We took the criticism when we sent out the PY20 numbers. It was all a work in progress, and it was not at all our intent to make it look like a local board failed in any way. And I'm going to not use that word again. But that was the word we used, and we apologize for that. We've done that in the past because you've done too many good things for one number, one outcome, potentially to make it look like you've underperformed at too strong a level. Could you potentially underperform, as this example shows? Yes. That doesn't mean you're not doing good things. So, you go into your negotiation, send us your expected levels, with realistic goals. We hear from a lot of your performance people, you're on those, Amy, and a lot of these here today are talk about all the great things you do, and you take it personal, and I appreciate that. And you should. You should be thankful for all the great things you do, and that we can recognize that in what we do. But we do have to have some limits on those. So we want to recognize that. We're giving you some leeway in each individual indicator. I really I'm not going to say I don't expect eventually somebody's going to have an underperforming indicator or overall program score, but that doesn't mean again, 1 year let's see what we did, what we can do better, what we can correct moving forward, and try and stop it before it gets too far along. We really are in this to try and work with all of you. We appreciated the positive comments from the last time around, overwhelmingly positive, to the tune of, what do I do with my sheet? We did a survey, so if there were 200, basically 201, 200, that's not right, can't do it, 220 responses in that survey. 201 of them were positive, whether strongly agree or agree. So we feel like the negotiations went well last time. We'll improve on them again this time even, and then they're going to go even better. So we look forward to all of you participating in that. Now I'll move on now, being mindful of our time. So what do you need to know going into these negotiations? It's the same thing. We're asking that you consider the same 4 factors of negotiations that were required of us at the state as we entered into negotiations with Region 5. And we're going to give you that data here in a moment. Compare across WIOAs. I'll mention to you why you should do that. The Statistical Adjustment Model, we're doing our best to continue to evolve it, apply it as we can at the end of the year. I'm sure, whatever the next iteration is, we're going to look at it, and we're probably going to have some more revisions. So that one set aside here for a second. I'll mention why. This third one is really the big one. Can you show us in your negotiation how you're going to continuously improve? That might be an increase in a number, in an indicator score. It might be improvements in your processes, your planning, your policies, your training and outreach to your staff. Whatever those are continuous improvement. And so if you come to the negotiation indicating, we know what we achieved in the last couple of years, but we just implemented a new policy, and would really like to be a little bit lower this time around. If we can understand what you're doing and recognize that, then we can come to an agreement along the lines you're looking for. So look at what continuous improvement means. And all your boards, they're all business led and labor led, and we all want a good return on investment. We have to be mindful of where our dollars are going and that we're getting good outcome. And again, I want to stress, we think you're getting good outcomes. Don't take 1 or 2 setbacks, if you will, in a particular indicator as an indication that you're not doing good things, not doing great things. So are we truly getting a good return on all those funds that we get, whether it be formula or the other? And then the last one is, we just have to be mindful that all of your numbers roll up to ours. And regardless of what the PY20 numbers looked at, for all of you, the state succeeded in all of its measures. So that was great. You did help us achieve our recognized assessment outcomes. And so we appreciate and thank you for that. If you have these last couple here, if you have additional information you'd like to include in your planning, BLS data that maybe we aren't giving you, something inside your system, maybe you're tracking something that isn't in iWids or isn't in IPATS, or you've got these, again, new policies, programs, your prior performance, you all received PY20 assessments. We're not going to reissue those to you. Take those into consideration as you plan, look at them and see how things reacted, and be prepared to explain your stance on your expected levels. And then when we get in negotiations or any employer information, this is one that our little work group kind of brought up, that sometimes you really don't know where you're at. So you're a little apprehensive going into negotiations because some of these larger employers may be lagging submitting information or something. And if that's the case, we just ask these 3 pieces. Anything down here you provide us as attachments to your expected levels so we can see it and be better prepared when we come to negotiation. And then this last item here, these 4 top ones, there's no real weight put on any of them. So as long as we're continuing to work and evolve with the SAM, we just aren't putting a lot of weight in that. We're looking at your history. We're looking at how you compare. Where did you fall in the last several years of your outcomes? And I'm going to move on to that here shortly. So that's what all this is about, is just looking at everything available. If you've got something that we don't have, please share it with us. when you submit expected levels so we can prepare as best we can. You're going to have everything we have in front of us. So here's a reference to continuous improvement. What does that really mean? And if you go into Teagle 11-19, here's some 5 examples that they provide. Can you increase your levels of performance previously attained? Some of you are really performing at a high level. Your indicator scores are 120, 140, 160. It may be impossible to think you can achieve an even higher level, and that's okay. But what you can do is remain in the same percentile ranking. Even if you're dropping a little, you still stay in the top. Maybe you're in the 4th quartile, which is the upper level of performance. It's like the A in a grading system. You want to try to stay there. So that's the second one. Can you are you changing your service strategy, delivery policies, things like that you can show as a continuous improvement? Why do you think what you're doing is a continuous improvement? We want to know that. And then we can take into account that maybe, you know, when things get started, sometimes they don't perform as highly as you expect until you get them rolling out for a period of time. So we want to recognize that. And then, you know, a maintenance of performance, previous performance for the top performing LWIBs, that's kind of the same thing as the ranking. If you're up there, we hope you can stay up there. If you're at the lower level in that 1st quartile, we hope you recognize that and you can bring yourself up maybe to the 2nd quartile, or at least up to the top of the 1st quartile. So you're looking at all the other LWIBs. Someone asked about that and made a comment in the last surveys from the last negotiation, wondering why we even provide that and how valuable that is. And we understand you're all different as far as LWIBs, just as we have 50 states, but we go out and we look at Region 5 states. How do we rank within those? We want to be at the top of the Region 5, 10 states. We also look at the larger states like New York, Pennsylvania, Texas, Florida, and California on a regular basis. And we want to be with them. We want to be at the top of that grouping. So what are their outcomes and what can we negotiate to try and bring us up? We need to be reasonable. We understand that. We don't want to set ourselves up for potential challenges. But we do want to be a leading state. And so we're looking at that. And that's what you would want to use those rankings for, is where are you at? How can I do better in one area or another? And there are other ways of continuous improvement that maybe you were thinking about that you can provide us as your background to your expected levels being submitted. So where's some of this data going to be held at? This is just kind of a quick screen capture from the 2022 WIOA Regional and Local Planning page on WorkNet. Most of you are probably familiar with that page. When you get this PowerPoint, this is actually a link, so you can click on it if you're not sure where it takes you. I can click on it. I'm not going to open it up, but this is down bottom. We added this down here. It's not going to be in orange. I just wanted to highlight it. And here's where you can get some information. Whoops, sorry. Here's some information. So we're doing our negotiations. It's tied to the plan because you're going to have to update your plans to reflect your negotiated goals in that. So here's a link to that policy we've already talked about earlier, the notice as well. And then here are a couple links down here that you're going to be familiar with. I'm going to show you the scorecards and rankings and the comparison tool. And Andy's putting that in the chat. Thanks, Andy. So if you want to click on that while you're listening to me. Here's what it looked like. It's held on a site called Power BI. If anyone's a stat guru, they know what Power BI is. Andy's our expert here. So if you have any questions with the data here, please email him. He's giving you his email here. Many of you might already have that, especially if you're working with that work group. So you can get a lot of information, outcome data that you probably already have anyway, with regard to your outcomes in each measure, each program through IWIDS or your own MIS system. You'll be able to click on and get employment trends. And then you can click on this download local scorecard. And so I'm gonna go to the next page. But this link at the top gets you to this site. Looks like this, and then you can click on all of these and get additional data. Here's your comparison. So you can go out and say, all right, I'm LWIA 10. Who do I compare with? Well, I want to first see where Illinois is at. What did it negotiate to? What have its outcomes been? And this shows you that comparison. You might want to then click on, let's say 6 or 5 or something similar up there in the northeast area of the state and say, well, where are they at? And how do I take that in consideration again as I submit expected levels and enter into the negotiations with us at the state. And it's got all the different data, so you can just keep clicking through many of these pages, see more data. we're giving you historical data back 4 or 5 years. Just be mindful, 2021 numbers aren't absolute final yet. We haven't submitted all of those to DOL. They're probably going to be very close, but there might be, so they should still be useful. But when we met with DOL, they were looking at 20 heavily and the first couple quarters of 21. How are things looking? So, you might want to look at some data that is there, but we're giving you pretty much end of year, even though it's not final. So there'll be some minimal changes in some of this data as the days and weeks go along that you'll recognize. So it won't be exactly what you see today or when you click on it tomorrow. Here's your rankings. So Andy's put these in the 4 quartiles, and you'll see again year to date here for 2021. That's the best we have. Somebody's achieved 100%. Great. Come over here and that's their. Help me out here. Is this? Yeah, this is their actual output. So they probably got
Yes.
numbers to reach 100%. Over to the right is your indicator score. So this better reflects your indicator. So you can look at these and you might be more interested in the indicator score column where you're ending up, but really you're going to negotiate to a rate over here on the left as far as an outcome, and the indicator score will reflect that calculation. And again, because they had so few numbers, they were able to achieve 100% at this point, looking back at their data. And then make sure when you look at your data, make sure you're complete. Make sure you've submitted everything. Make sure you're looking at the pool of participants in each of these measures and they're accurate. And if you find any errors, let us know. We want to make sure we go back and work with you to get them corrected if they're not accurate. And then Paul wanted to remind me, I think we're asking that all of you update all of your information for PY21 no later than I think August, was it 28th, Paula?
Tuesday the 29th.
29th. Okay, so if you haven't gone in there and corrected and kind of validated all the information, please do that in the next week and a half or so, because Jeff will be submitting these, and at that point they'll kind of be locked down to what we'll have available for you in those. The item on the right is the same data. It's just sorted by WIOA. So if you're just trying to find your number, he's got the ranking behind it, so you can still see where you fell in those. And again, the 4 quartiles is green, and the orange quartile is considered a first quartile. So very helpful again for you moving forward, giving you 3 years of history. You can see your unemployment rates on that Power BI site as well. Many of these are recognized, go into your adjustments in the SAM, although again, through the developments of that work group, some of these may be changing. We might be adding or deleting some of these as we continue to evolve it and try to get a better, more accurate model for Illinois. And that's really what the attempt is while there's a DOL model out there, DOL and Illinois aren't quite the same. Or the country and Illinois. So we're trying to reflect that better in those conversations. Still watching? Okay, I think I've continued to keep up on your questions. Just keep plugging those in if you have any. So here again is another vital piece of information going in negotiations. As we did last time, we gave you our negotiated rate for the 2-year period. You see PY20 and 21. In between those, we want to show you what we know now. Obviously, we only got assessed on 2 measures, so indicators. So that's why you see a lot of green on this. You can see what we submitted to DOL as far as our outcomes, but we didn't have adjustments on 3 out of the 5 measures. So that's why you don't see anything in those 3 cells. But you'll see then when we went to negotiations this time around, you're going to see more than not these didn't increase, in my mind, in a significant way. When you look at what our outcomes were last time around, here we were at while we negotiated 6,500, our outcomes as a state were over 7,500, and that's what we landed on for this adult median earnings as a negotiated rate. We think that's doable. We think the way things are working out, increase in pay, things of that nature, we think we can easily meet this and certainly not go below the indicator score or potentially negatively affect our program or overall indicator scores. So Where we did see some increases, and be mindful, are down here, these last two in each of the three programs, credential attainment and measurable skill gains. And the measurable skill gains being the most, but we've been talking to all of you, doing a lot of technical assistance, and we think the numbers being down where they were in some instances, we're just continuing to gain knowledge in what an MSG is and ensuring we're tracking those, ensuring we've got career planners putting those in the system, reporting them accurately. So we think while it's quite a bit of a jump from our last negotiation, it's still, we negotiated less than what we had as an outcome in all of these. So we don't feel like we, overstep our ability to perform, nor put any of you in jeopardy in going into negotiations thinking these are too high. Obviously, some of you will be able to negotiate above the state rates, and some of you won't, depending on what the measure and the program is. But this again is something you have now in this PowerPoint that you can, and some of you have seen this, I've shared this in the IWP meetings. So you know what our expectations are. We are negotiating only one outcome for both 22, 23. I mentioned this before. I'm not sure where we went off track. Where we did measure the youth median earnings, we did actually go up in that one for 23. DOL asked us that, and we thought that was reasonable, so we went ahead and agreed to it. But we'd really like to stay with one negotiation for both years, and that's our intent in going into negotiations, that we're negotiating one rate for both years.
Mark,
Yes.
I had a quick question about MSG and credential, and it's somewhat related to the negotiations, but at least one of our agencies has noticed that currently in IWIDS, the youth who get OJT are still pulling into the credential and the MSG measures. And so that could, I don't know that we have a ton of those, but that could be impacting our measures. Oh, okay. Thanks, Paula. Just saw your note. And then kind of a follow-up to that, because it also impacts our youth measures, are we also going to get is it going to get updated for this PY for I can't even remember what service it is now, but place an alternative school pulling youth into the measure.
The alternative school element.
That's
yes,
one,
so
sorry.
Yeah, a trigger for putting out of school youth into the training measures.
Is that going to be part of the final reporting, so that'll get updated?
My hope and expectation is yes, and I'll confirm with Jeff. And now, since it usually, I'm just with Mark's note from me to please have your transactions complete, like all your MSGs and credentials if you need me to exit anyone. It used to be around the 16th, but he extended it for us to the 29th. So I'll send an update on that too, Dina. So thank you. The OJTs as well as that alternative school. So thanks.
Great. Thanks, Paula.
Okay, great.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Paula, for updating everyone on that. All right, so let's get through these last couple and see if we can't save some time either for maybe someone wants to share a best practice. So here's the statistical adjustment model. Again, we're in a work in progress. I mentioned that on the previous slide as one of the factors. We're really, what the statistical adjustment model attempts to do is level the playing field, account for differences in economies participants are being served in. So they're going to be different. The adjustments are going to be different for every LWIA and for each of the programs and each of the measures. They all, there's no one adjustment going to be applied to multiple areas, even though the number might work out the same in a couple instances. That's not reflective of the fact that it's that similar, just the adjustments worked out that way. Really want to be focusing on local areas serving the hardest to serve. The more barriers you account for, and we hope in revisions of the modeling, this is going to be a little bit more clear. But the more barriers you're serving should help you. And so I don't trip over myself, I'm going to try to do this because it's always confusing to me. Remember, your adjustment, if it's a negative, is actually a positive on your ability to reach your goals, your adjusted goals. If the adjustment is a negative, it's going to take your negotiated rate downward, which is good. And the vice versa. If your adjustments are positive, it means you're going to go up, and it might be more difficult to reach those adjusted rates. So just keep that in mind. It's kind of backwards. I always try to figure out over the last few months if there's another way of presenting it, but I can't come up with one. So if someone else has a way to say it differently, go ahead and send that my way. But you're negotiating now to finalize this, and we're going to change. I know that's hard to understand. That was one of the criticisms or challenges that were issued in the summary last time, or the survey last time. But what it's doing is it accounting after the fact who you actually served versus who you thought you should serve going into the program year. That's really the emphasis. We can have a longer conversation if someone really has it, but it's really appropriate. We want to capture what really happens after the fact and adjust for that. So I mentioned last assessments, and I just want to show you some things again, trying to help set you to realize maybe it wasn't as bad as we presented it to you. We again apologize for that. But if we looked at all the measures that were done, so two indicators, 3 programs, 22 LWIAs. 87.8% of those 122 assessments successfully performed at the 90% level. Another 15 performed if we would have set it at 80%. We set it as an individual indicator at 70%. So only one outlier, had we had this in place for PY20, only one outlier would not have performed successfully. And I want to say outlier because it was really off, and we're still trying to figure out fully what happened there. It was a lack of numbers. We understand that when you have very few numbers, each individual really affects it. So we are working with that as well in the modeling for the same, is how can we adjust and take into account smaller numbers in the numerator and denominator especially. So hopefully our next modeling will take into account for that. Will not lead to what that one individual indicator score led to. But I just wanted to show you that you really all did some really good things. And if we had even had an 80% threshold, it would look so much, would have been so much more emphasis on all the great things you're doing. I mentioned this earlier, more of the adjustment factors were negative, which helped performance, than were not. So if you're trying to think, oh my God, worst case scenario, oh my God, I got to negotiate down, kind of negotiate where you need to be. Truly, these things at this point in time aren't predictable enough. I think you just should negotiate where you think you can fall at 90 or 100%, whatever you want to use. I think you put yourself in a precarious situation if you negotiate where you think you can reach 70%. So don't negotiate to that point. But if you negotiate around the 90 still as kind of a starting point that you think you can reach 90%, you're going to be in really good shape, I think. And I don't think many of these adjustments will work against you. Had we applied the other 2 measures here at the bottom, these last 2, in each instance, one LWIB would have not met the 90% overall program score. And if I remember right, they would have achieved 89.2%. No, I'm sorry, I'm looking at that was the one that had the real outlier on the one measure that didn't reach even 80%. They would have not reached 90 on overall program score. On the overall indicator score of 90%, one LWIA would not have met the 90%, but theirs was at like 89.3%. So they were right there. Any improvement on any one of the 3 measures or two indicators that were assessed would have, and that's just in those 2 indicators. We didn't have the other 3. So I just did a quick calculation of averaging those 2 together. So, it's not a very scientific way when you only have 2 numbers. If one's down, obviously it pulls the other one down. If we have 5 measures, that one probably would not have led to underperforming in an overall indicator score. So I, again, hopefully trying to ease your minds a little when you're preparing for this, that that maybe it's not as drastic, it's not as, it's still important. I don't want anyone walking away thinking we at the state level don't think these are important, that we're lackadaisical about it. We're going to negotiate to what we think all of you can reach. We're going to be, strategic about it. So all of you should do the same on your end of it. But I think this just depicts that it wasn't as bad as we maybe showed it when we sent all those assessments out without much warning. And then the last couple things I want to touch on are, we asked that you submit your proposal. I talked about attachment G early on. Don't need to go through everything on this side. Two important things is what is the goal or expected level you want, and who is going to be representing the LWIB. Make sure that's on there. All of these need to be signed by the chair and CEO. So make sure you're prepared to get their signature. If you're running into issues, we know last time there were a few difficulty getting those. Let us know as early as you know, so we can make arrangements to recognize that maybe it's going to be after that September 2nd to get all these submitted because you're waiting on signatures. The calls, I mentioned pretty much all of those. Again, we had a lot of positive comments on how they went. And so we look forward to similar going forward. I guess that's it on this. Any questions on that? And then we've got 8 minutes. We can ask if anyone has anything else they want to talk about, or if someone does have a best practice around performance they'd like to share. Go ahead if you want to speak up, open your phone line. I think Kirsten has them all open. You just have to unmute yourself and let us know. Or if you have any other comments to any of this, please let us know. All right, well, if no one has any other comments, we'll let you have a few minutes back. Any questions you have around the negotiation? We use, again, this office hours for primarily updating you on that. Please send them directly to me. I'll speak with Paula, Patty, whoever else internally we need to get you an appropriate response. CC Paula in case I'm out. We want to get back to you as soon as possible so you can continue your efforts in planning and submitting your expected levels. And again, when you submit those, I will recognize that with an email to whomever submitted it, and then send you all the remaining available dates and times. And so the sooner you get those in, the more choices you're going to have. We'll ask for a second date in case maybe two of these come in at the same time and they conflict, or if we get to crunch time and somebody really is running out of dates that work with their schedule, we might come back to you on your second alternate date and time and ask if you are still available on that one so that we can free up one that somebody else really needs to fit into their schedule. So we'll be asking for a couple dates and times in that document. Paula, I think Maureen's asking 29th deadline for 21 enrollments. Is it?
In the chat?
Yeah. It says August 29th, the deadline for PY21 enrollments also.
So they would have been enrolled. So we would just be looking at just all your data entry, especially if you have any MSGs, credentials that need added to the exit records. If you need any exits process that might have gone over for one reason or another, you need me to do, because when Jeff finalizes performance, that's what he's reporting. And to optimize your performance and your outcomes and make sure the data is correct, we can't lock the system from letting you record in it. So we just have to ask that you complete anything that will impact PY21. Does that make sense? I don't see your message in chat. Okay. Yes. You'll still be able to add things after that date, but they won't if it's for your PY21 performance timeframe, you won't get the outcome. Even though you're adding it, it won't have been calculated in your performance outcome. So that's why it's important. As well, it's federal reporting, but thanks.
This
All
is
right, so-
Renee. I had one quick question, Mark. There was discussion about possibly rerunning the performance with the adjustments to the different variables. Is that still?
Well, what that work group, and Andy, you're on here, confirmed to me, but the work, we're not going to rerun PY20 for an assessment standpoint. They're going to continue to get input, take that feedback. Like, we knew there were a couple errors, so we're waiting for some data to be included in that model, updated data that we know was incorrectly captured. We want to do that. We want to look at, they've looked at some of the adjustment, the variables that said, well, that really doesn't apply to Illinois as a whole, especially. Can you remove that from the model? And so they're looking at, so they're going to look at various models, removing things and correcting those that we know the work group wants to look at. They'll rerun them to see if the model works more accurately, if that's the right word. And Andy, maybe you have a better word than that, but we're not reassessing PY20. It was a hold harmless.
Correct.
We're moving forward to PY21. We just want to get this using the PY20 model. We want to get in a better place. So when we come back out, you know, I think it's going to be early next year and give you your PY21 assessments, that new model will be used in the assessment. Does that make sense?
Thank you for the clarification.
Yeah, and again, for anyone that wasn't able to join us, if you had staff, LWIB chairs that maybe want to see this, remember we're going to put this out there, this recording on that 2022 regional local planning webpage I showed you. If you downloaded this document, go back to it here. You'll be able to go to that page. It's linkable up here in the blue, and you'll be able to get all this data. And we're going to put below this performance comparison tool today's material. So anyone that wasn't able to join today, it'll take us usually a day or two to get this recording finalized and uploaded with WorkNet's help. But we'll be able to get those two documents, the agenda and this PowerPoint, out there fairly quickly, so all of you can use it as reference and use all these other tools as references. And if anyone has any recommendations for something else that you think is you find valuable, let us know. And if it's something that others can benefit with, we'll share that with others, so that we're all using the best and most current and most useful information and data as we enter into these. All right, with that, really do appreciate all of you joining us today. Again, our next office hours for performance will be November 16th, again, 1 to 2:30. And in the meantime, we'll do these negotiations and probably start looking at additional technical assistance after negotiations. So sometime October, November, we'll be looking at what more additional professional development or technical assistance we need. Probably in that time frame, it may not be performance specific, but by that time we might have some other topics that are relatable to performance that might be coming out as far as webinars and information and material. So keep looking for all that from Laura, myself, or the ICSPS weekly updates to register for anything that's upcoming. And again, appreciate all of your participation, input, questions, great questions. Oh, the other thing we'll get out there is I'll capture some of these questions, finalize the Q&A, and we'll hopefully get that out on this page here by the end of the week as well. So you'll be able to see about 80% of it are the same questions as last time. We just had to update dates and things like that. But we do have a few other questions that came up during roundtables and work groups and this session today that I want to add to it. So we'll get some more information out to you in that Q&A. And it'll be attached to the policy as well on e-policy. All right, everyone have a great day. And we'll talk to you again soon.